Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat. That game being Kingdom Hearts Re-Chain of Memories for the PS4. Re-Chain of Memories was directed by Tetsuya Nomura and published by Square Enix. It is a strategy RPG based around cards. Re-Chain of Memories is a remake of 2004's GBA game called Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. It is a spin-off game with spin-off gameplay. As I said, it is card-based instead of your normal action-based combat within the previous Kingdom Hearts game. Speaking of which, I had played Kingdom Hearts about a month ago and I remember liking it. However, I heard that this game wasn't as good as its predecessor was, or within this franchise. I mostly heard that from fans of the games, and so I was going in not expecting to like Re-Chain of Memories. However, after playing through it, I ended up liking it a lot, actually. So let's get into why I liked it. However, I'd like to put up a disclaimer. Just like the previous Kingdom Hearts game, I've seen Clemps' video on Re-Chain of Memories as well, so I'm spoiled on this game's story too. So if you're looking for the thoughts of a person who is going in fresh for Kingdom Hearts Re-Chain of Memories, I am not that person. I apologize. So starting with the look of the game, the look of Re-Chain of Memories isn't that different from the previous one I had played. There are a couple new environments in this game like Castle Oblivion or Twilight Town, but for the most part you're still getting the same Disney worlds, you're getting the same protagonists, Sora, Donald, and Goofy, and even the newer characters are in that same style as this game's predecessor. However, character designs, such as for Naminé or the Organization 13 members, were all pretty cool, with the members having personality showing through their facial features and above the neck, as all of the Organization members wore black robes. The look of the UI in this game received an upgrade. It looked a lot more advanced. However, the journal in this game took a bit of a hit. I didn't like the way the journal was set up or designed in this game. It just looked worse to me. There was this weird thing going on throughout the game where characters' eyes sometimes would change from their 3D modeled look to what looked to be sprites, and this was mainly happening when the character was bending down or they were zoomed out so that the face was a little bit more obscured. It was very weird and definitely noticeable. The soundtrack of Re-Chain of Memories is again done by Yoko Shimomura, with mostly the same soundtrack that you got from this game's predecessor. However, a couple of newer tracks are thrown in, like the Castle Oblivion theme, Naminé's theme, and the Organization 13 battle theme. One very huge notable thing about the voice acting from this game was the deliveries that some of the voice actors had put into this game. Most of the line deliveries in this game were extremely off or inconsistent. There were very few characters that had good line deliveries throughout the game. This was very distracting and a huge bump in quality from the quality of the VA in the last game. As cheesy as the dialogue could be, at least the VA was good in that game. Here it seems like nobody knows what they're doing and direction was all over the place for how they should portray their characters. It was definitely distracting. The story in Re-Chain of Memories is a bit more to take in than its predecessor. I'm going to try to give you a bit of a synopsis of the beginning of the game. So picking up straight from where the last game took off, Sora, Donald, and Goofy enter a mysterious castle looking to find Riku and King Mickey. Once they enter, they are greeted by a mysterious black hooded figure who explains to them that the castle's doors can only be opened by cards, that Sora must fight with cards, which Donald and Goofy turn into, and that as Sora progresses throughout the castle, he will lose his memories. As you get further along in the story, two plot lines start to mold. One is that Sora remembers that he, Riku, and one other girl were friends on his home island, but he cannot remember who that girl is. Meanwhile, a mysterious girl in the castle is taking the memories of Sora and replacing them with fake ones. The other storyline is that the members of Organization 13, a mysterious organization we don't know much about, want to use Sora and his Keyblade to take over the organization using Naminé's power. And so, of course, there is more to the story than the basic gist that I gave you, but it would take a while to go through the entire thing, definitely. Big criticism that I had with the language they used to portray the story in was that it was very confusing. A lot of the characters sounded like they were talking in riddles throughout the beginning of the game. It was a bit hard to decode for me. And I'm not saying it was clever either, it was like purposefully written so that it would be confusing and mislead the player. I liked the Naminé storyline more than I liked the Organization 13 one, because her story seems like it had an actual impact on our protagonist Sora, while the Organization plotline seemed like it was a bit more detached. I don't know how important it'll be coming up in Kingdom Hearts 2, we'll see, but hopefully we don't get more of the same that we got here. So throughout Chain of Memories, players can go through the same Disney worlds that were from this game's predecessor, Kingdom Hearts, with kind of the similar storylines, where some would deviate from the stories that you got from Kingdom Hearts, but most of them are very similar. It is worth noting that the events of this game, which is a spin-off title, are actually very important to the Kingdom Hearts lore. So for those who want to experience everything, they cannot skip this title. Luckily, with the compilation disc that I'm playing these games on, and with the advent of the internet, it won't be that hard to avoid this game. I do have a problem with the Organization 13 members supposedly being emotionless. They're actually pretty animated and expressive. I get why you can't write a character as an actual emotionless being, as that could come off as boring to a player or a viewer. However, I also think it's bad or lazy writing to say something is emotionless by saying that they display emotions because of something like they want to have them so they imitate them. I just don't take that as an excuse. The final thing I have to say about the story is that the ending of the game is very nice and wholesome. It's a little bit cheesy in that Kingdom Hearts style, but it'll make you smile. The gameplay of Chain of Memories is vastly different from that of Kingdom Hearts, and so there's going to be a little bit to unpack here, so just stay with me. First, I'm going to talk about how you explore environments in this game. Like Kingdom Hearts, players in Chain of Memories will travel in between different Disney-themed worlds to advance the story. Players can only go through the worlds if they have a world card, which are obtained by defeating bosses. Once they enter a world, they must traverse a room-based dungeon, very similar in design and layout to that of a roguelike game. Think Binding of Isaac, or Enter the Gungeon. If the players want to enter another room within the dungeon, players must use a card called a map card that meets the door's value requirement. For example, a door might need a card that has a value that is above a 6. However, the card will also have an effect on the coming room, like having a save point or changing the behavior of the enemies. So players must think ahead about what card they're using, as that effect could have an extreme impact on them. Each room within these dungeons will also have breakable objects that, when broken, give things like cards, money, or health. Enemy encounters within rooms are finite, and work kind of like modern regular RPGs, where you must run into an enemy that is there in order to enter a battle scene. A couple of problems I had with exploring environments were that I wish the minimap was a bit more clear on what direction a door would take you in. The minimap itself is in an isometric view and will always be rotated the same way no matter how you enter a room, so it can be a bit confusing as to what direction you would be going in entering another door. I also wish you could lock onto overworld enemies like you could in battle, or like you could in this game's predecessor. You can't really do that, so you kind of have to like swing and hope, but sometimes Sora will kind of auto-lock onto like a breakable or hittable object. Or if you try to swing at an enemy, you might hit a wall, kind of Dark Souls style, canceling your attack altogether. Finally, I got really lucky with the map cards that I got, but I've heard stories from fans about players having to grind to get the card that they need in order to progress. So that could have ruined the flow of this game if that had happened to me. But I think I was using cards a lot more effectively as well, making sure I was using certain cards within certain rooms. So that way I always had the cards that I would want to use coming into doors. So I think it is a little bit of random RNG and a little bit of how you strategically think about cards progressing through these dungeons. Moving on to battles, once you're in a battle scene, the player can use the cards in their deck displayed in the bottom left corner of the screen to execute actions. Once a card is played, it will go to the bottom middle part of the screen, where it will stay until the action is completed. Meanwhile, enemies can play their own cards. Every card has a number value, and higher values trump lower ones. However, any card can be countered by a 0 value, and a 0 value can be countered by any card. This makes the player think strategically and quickly to pull off winning strategies. The actions that these cards can pull off include attacking, healing, summoning, and refilling cards. If the player runs out of cards in their deck, they can refill it by holding down the button used to summon cards, but on a specific refill card, and you'll know what it is when you see it. It's like a very black card with just one number value on it. And the number value on this card will start with a value of 1 and will increase to a maximum of 3. And what this value means is that when you hold down this button, it will cycle through this card. It'll fill this card up with like red. And so if you have a 1, you have to cycle through that just once. But if you have a 3, you have to cycle through that 3 times. And so with each time you refill your entire deck, the amount you must cycle gets more and more until you reach 3. Also, while you're doing the cycling process, you have to stand still. You cannot move. So this can leave you very vulnerable. So you have to think about what the right time is in order to refill your entire deck if you're using this method. However, as I said, there are other cards that refill your deck as well, so you don't have to do this. Within battles, players can also lock onto enemies like they could in Kingdom Hearts. Again, they can't do that in the overworld, only in battles. And a battle within Chain of Memories is one when the player gets rid of all the enemies within the scene and is lost when the player loses all of their health. If the player wins, they gain experience and money as well as a map card. Moving on to deck building within this game, which I thought was pretty neat and very engaging. We'll start off with when the player levels up, which when they do so, they have a choice of increasing their health, card point stat, or they may even be able to learn a new sleight, which we'll get into later. When you get into the deck building menu, the player can only have as much cards in their deck as their CP stat allows, which is their card point stat. And each card that you can use in battle has a CP value. So the players must think about what cards they'll need to have in their deck in order to progress smoothly throughout the game. And in the deck building menu, players can swap cards, rearrange their deck, view the total amount of cards that they have in their inventory, and even throw out cards. And I really like this. It was pretty fun to do. I wasn't really expecting something so simple to be so fun. So now focusing on sleights within the game. Players can view these sleights within the deck building menu. And what a sleight is that in battles, players can stack up to 3 cards, and depending on what they stacked, they can perform a sleight. And a sleight is like a super action, and can do things like heal more effectively, pull off higher damage dealing attacks, and perform more useful effects to either Sora or the enemy. Some of these sleights have to be learned through leveling up in the game, so the player is not powered up from the start. I'm also putting the bosses within Chain of Memories within their own category. So Chain of Memories features bosses from this game's predecessor, Kingdom Hearts, as well as some newer bosses, but the standout bosses to me were the Organization 13 battles. These bosses were some of the hardest bosses I fought in video games ever. The AI for them is very well made and reactive. The player needs a lot of forethought going into one of these fights. However, a lot of the bosses in the game can be cheesed through with 2 sleights, Sonic Blade and Lethal Frame. And why these are both effective is that both of these immobilize the boss and have high damage dealing outputs. Once I figured these 2 out, I used these on every boss fight. Odds are if one doesn't work, the other does. And so that made these really hard and challenging boss fights very easy, so that was a big problem. Once a player beats the game, they can play through the game again as Riku in his own little story. However, I didn't really care for the mechanical changes as well as the very similar content that you had to go through in order to play through this secondary storyline. So I just skipped this part and just went online to find out what happens anyway. I recommend you give this a shot if you liked the gameplay that was in the very first storyline. But for me, some of the things they took away, like deck building and refilling, kind of ruined the game for me. Plus, I heard the bosses within Riku's storyline are even harder than that of Sora's storyline, so I didn't really want to put myself through that. Some other caveats that I had about Chain of Memories gameplay is that the UI within the battle scenes is too busy. There is a lot that the eye needs to focus on. For example, in the top left is your health, in the bottom left is your cards, in the bottom middle is where your cards are being played, in the bottom right is where the enemy's cards are, in the top right is the enemy's health, and in the middle of it all is where the battle is actually happening. And so that's a lot of focal points that the eye needs to switch to. So I don't know if the Kingdom Hearts team ever revisited this gameplay, but if they do, I would like to see the UI within battles streamlined a bit more, or even just a bit more simplified. The other caveat I had was that the beginning of this game was very rough, and I didn't really start having fun until I started getting cards and customizing my deck. So if you, the player, are going to play this game, I would definitely recommend not judging it based off of the first couple rooms of the game. Give it a little bit more to get going. So to bring everything all together, I overall really liked Chain of Memories. There was a lot that I had to go over, so I hope I did not make this game sound too cumbersome. Once you get into it, you can have a lot of fun. I'm going to give it a final score of a 7 out of 10. The pros of this game was that it had fun gameplay, fun exploration, it was very strategic, and had a neat story. While the cons I had for this game was the very bad line delivery from voice actors, the slow start, the samey content, and the cheesable gameplay. So that is it for my review of Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. If you want, like, comment, or subscribe. I also have my social media links and my online portfolio down in the description below. With that out of the way, make sure to have a nice day.